Hey there, everybody. Welcome to this bonus episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 92 with Cait Kirby, who is the creator of these popular kind of choose your own adventure stories. They examine the realities of campus reopenings in the midst of the global pandemic. So I'm really glad I got the chance to talk with Cait about it and her background, which is super unique. And it just was a really fascinating conversation. We got into a lot of nuances of the realities of campus reopenings in the midst of the pandemic. And we recorded this before what really this week were kind of some of the big players announcing their plans, such as Harvard and Princeton and Rutgers. So, it definitely takes a new light as big institutions are committing to either entirely or mostly online semesters or even the entire academic years coming up. So really hope that you're able to go check out the tools and stories that she created and connect with Cait. Keep the discussion going. Yeah, just really great stuff. Check out all the stuff that we talked about in the show notes as usual. And after this quick message from our sponsor, this is episode number 92 with Cait Kirby. This episode is sponsored by Degree.me, a one-stop college research tool for students. If you work for a college or university, you'll want to learn all about their ability to connect you with the right students at a budget-friendly price. To find out more, please visit degree.me/HEG. But I'm really excited to talk with you for the podcast here because I just kind of stumbled across on Twitter the work that you're doing, putting out some educational resources. And it just seems like your background, you're so kind of uniquely sort of fitted for this moment with your kind of academic interests and work in biology, but also really focused on effective teaching practices and things like that. So I'm really excited to kind of learn more about your story and the work that you're doing. So really appreciate you taking time out for the podcast here.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be able to kind of talk about these resources and my journey and kind of how I got here and how I became interested in these things.
Yeah, and it's just super relevant stuff, obviously just very timely. So I'm glad we can kind of share all this out with people. But we will start out here as we always do. If you want to give everybody a brief introduction of who you are and your professional journey of how you got to be where you are today.
Yeah, so my name is Cait Kirby. I'm a graduate student studying biology. I'm almost finished. I'm at Vanderbilt right now, and I got my master's and my bachelor's at Smith College in Massachusetts. I actually got my bachelor's in both biology and anthropology, and I think that has kind of positioned me to explore the world and explore these research interests in kind of both a humanistic and also scientific way.
Yeah, so I guess, it's kind of twofold because I think you do really have, the firm interest in biology and also in, you have all these resources on your website about like effective teaching practices and everything. So just tell me, I guess, a little bit like what do you enjoy most about these, these different interests that you have and sort of putting out resources and those sort of things. So like what's kind of keeping you engaged and motivated in terms of your current work?
Yeah. So as a graduate student, I kind of am constantly juggling both my biology research. I study mitochondrial DNA in worms, and that's super interesting. And I really enjoy kind of figuring out how things work. But then I also get to explore kind of teaching, and I get to explore it both in these kind of formal ways in the classroom, but also with mentoring other grad students and undergrad students in our research lab. And then I also have the opportunity to play around with other interests like making these resources and like this twined story that kind of just happened. And I really enjoy that in academia, I'm able to work on a variety of things at the same time. And that's really useful because experiments fail all the time. And it's really nice that when experiments fail, I can sort of shift my focus and get re-energized by thinking about pedagogy and belonging and access in the classroom. And then when I'm sort of recharged and I'm feeling a little bit better about the research failures, I can go back and try again. And having these multiple interests has really kept me afloat because my research has failed a lot.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess if there's any sort of context or sort of lead up in terms of like just broadly, you have like a variety of educational resources in terms of like teaching practices and things on your website, which of course we will link out to, so folks can check out. But yeah, I guess just sort of like how did that kind of come about for you, just generally, of saying, one, that you wanted to create these things, and two, that you wanted to really kind of broaden their potential impact of sharing them out widely and those sort of things? Because I guess I know you work sort of the graduate assistant and teaching assistant and those sort of things. I don't know if that was sort of like the catalyst, or if you've always had an interest in this and you kind of pursued it more readily. So yeah, just kind of the story of it, and just kind of, I guess, briefly explaining the types of resources that you have that you share out.
Yeah. So when I was at Smith College, as I mentioned, I got my bachelor's there in biology, but then also my master's. And while I was working on my master's, I developed a teaching laboratory exercise focused on an inversion polymorphism on the X chromosome in humans. And so basically what that means is that there are two genes, a larger one and a smaller one, and they can be in one order, large, small end of chromosome, or they could be in the other order, small, large end of chromosome. And it's really awesome. And it's actually conserved throughout all eutherian mammals. And my research advisor there, Dr. Bob Merritt, wanted me to take this concept that we'd read about in the literature and create this teaching a laboratory exercise, because students tend to identify more and be more interested in research when it has sort of some connection to themselves. And so I developed this teaching a laboratory exercise where students swabbed their own cheeks and they extracted their own DNA, and they figured out which order the genes were in on their own X chromosomes, which was really cool and really fun. And that was sort of the catalyst years ago for me thinking about wanting to be involved in education. And then when I came to Vanderbilt, I worked with my advisor, Dr. Malik Patel, and we work with worms, and we study mitochondrial DNA. And so he suggested that I develop a teaching lab for this course-based undergraduate research experience that I was asked to teach. And so the students really explored this open-ended question of how come a mitochondrial DNA is inherited only through one parent. And the way that we devised this experiment is that we tried to get inheritance of mitochondrial DNA through the other parent, through the paternal parent in worms. And so kind of all of these teaching experiences led me to think about, how do students really like internalize how they learn, and what kinds of resources work best for students. And so I grew up with pretty poor study skills. I missed out on a lot of what we call the hidden curriculum, how to study, what office hours are, things like that. And so like I never attended office hours until I hosted office hours. And so no one really ever taught me about metacognition or executive functioning or any of these things. And so because I've been kind of exploring them through my teaching, I realized that other people might need these things spelled out for them just like I did. And can I make them in a way that's really engaging and that's also really easy to digest? I know that whenever I want to learn something, I Google it and then I click the image tab, because I don't want to read a ton of text at first. I want to get kind of like a big overview of what's going on. And once I have that sort of a mental image in my head and I have a scaffold for that knowledge, then I want to go back and read more. And so that's kind of the reasoning for these resources, and the reasoning for them to be kind of these bite-sized pieces that you can print off and put in your binder and revisit every time that you have an exam and you want to think about how to answer questions on an exam or how to be studying better.
Yeah, I love it. Because I think, just kind of the idea of like just being generous with sharing, just in general, just like, hey, here's something, it's such a low kind of barrier to entry, like somebody can just check it out, download it, use it, and maybe, even like remix it on their own of like what makes the most sense of how they would prefer to use it and that sort of thing. But, just sort of not hogging something that's, worked well for you. And, I always kind of appreciate that sort of ethos and everything. So I guess then, in that sort of spirit and that sort of frame of thinking in terms of, sharing out educational resources, a recent tool or sort of resource that you provided was, my brain kind of captured it as this sort of like choose your own adventure story for what it's going to be like for a student realistically with, sort of the guidances that we've gotten from many campuses. Like, what's the reality going to be like for a student to return to campus and be going about their studies and everything, which I found just really compelling and really visceral, the hard choices that you'd have to make and the real implications of them. So, and I know too, I was just looking that you also have created something that kind of takes on the faculty's perspective as well, which I think is really just equally valuable and kind of the tough choices there as well. So I guess in a similar way, I'm just like, what inspired you to create and share those out? And just kind of getting into, I guess, just the broad strokes of like, how you created them and that sort of thing.
The story of how the Twine story came to be is kind of a strange one. I think over a month ago, Norm Clark wrote this great piece in Inside Higher Ed about basically a narrative form of what a day in the life of a student would look like in fall 2020 in this socially distanced classroom because of COVID-19. And I read the piece and I thought that it was super powerful. And I also thought this would not be my experience. This would not be the experience of most of my friends either, that we have other worries, we have other concerns that are not reflected in this piece. And I think that those concerns are really important and really valid. And so I wrote kind of like a companion piece to it where I added in kind of these layers of marginalization. And when that piece did not get picked up, I sort of just held on to it and put it kind of on the back burner. And then the week that I tweeted the Twine story that I made, I was teaching this intensive STEM pedagogy course for grad students and postdocs at Vanderbilt through the Vanderbilt Center for Teaching. And so the story of how I ended up teaching this class is kind of a unique one. This class had not been created yet. And so not only did I need to teach the class, but I also had to make the class. And the person who was originally supposed to teach this class got a job and so had to leave kind of unexpectedly and quickly. And so it's kind of a quick turnaround for me to create and then teach the class. And so the week that I was teaching that class, I was planning to include Twine on Thursday, because on Thursday I was going to teach the like different teaching technologies and strategies. And I really love to use games in the classroom. And so I thought, okay, I'll just show them twinery.org, right? Like I will just show the students or the participants in the class that Twine exists. And so I had the rest of the course already figured out except for Thursday. And so on Monday, the first day of this week-long course, a student remarks, I bet we could use video games in the classroom. I just don't know how. And I think that this really just speaks to kind of who I am as a person and as a creator, that I took that as a challenge. And so I said, okay, can I create a Twine story before Thursday? It's Monday. I've never finished a Twine story in my life. At this point in time, I had tried a Twine story before. I got overwhelmed by it and I got busy with research. And so I just thought I would come back to it later. And then here, this student remarks, I don't know how. And so I I just kind of got to work. And so I had no idea what the Twine story would be about, but I thought, okay, what can I quickly put together? And I pulled out that companion narrative piece that I had written, and I said, can I make this into a Twine, as you're saying, kind of like a choose your own adventure? And so in about 4 hours, I put that together. And so I gave myself 4 days, but I really just kind of buckled down, and I put this story together. And then I asked a few colleagues to kind of read it over. And then I just tweeted it out, not really expecting anything to come of it. I really was just, and still am, worried about what the fall is going to look like for my friends and colleagues who are in these marginalized groups, who are going to be forced into the classroom and struggle and have to put their health at risk every day. And I didn't intend really anybody to look at it, right? It was just kind of, well, I made this for this course, I might as well just tweet it out to others. And then it sort of took on a life of its own, and it got like this really intense like virality, I guess, that I was not expecting. I didn't even have the right click tracking installed in the Twine story to even really know how many clicks I got right at the beginning, because I just really was not anticipating this. And I guess, yeah, like the story is that I was just frustrated and worried about the choices that administrators are making based on what I think is not data or not the true lived experiences of individuals, but are really just based on the finances of the university.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just, yeah, it's so interesting because I think it plays out the reality that I have to believe certain decision makers haven't really given the appropriate thought to, like they're just sort of enacting policies or sort of making statements and these sort of things and leaving it up to other people to figure out how to implement them or kind of navigate them. So yeah, it's just fascinating to me. And I think as things often go, like, yeah, you didn't make it being like, oh boy, yeah, I'm going to make all this money off this and I'm going to like parlay this into, internet fame, internet fame and fortune, whatever. Yeah, like you're just earnestly thinking about this and creating it. I mean, genuinely for your own purposes. And then I'm just being generous, as you kind of noted before, is sharing it out and kind of taking, having people take it as they will. So, yeah, I mean, I'm really glad that I kind of caught it because I think it has kind of cemented for me. And again, I mean, you kind of expressed that obviously you didn't really have any firm purpose or goal in mind when you shared it out. But for me, like it cemented the idea of like, at least for the fall, I personally strongly believe that campuses really need to go all digital and put in the amount of, the appropriate amount of time and resources into it, because that's just, we're not out of the woods yet. Like we're really, we're seeing more resurgences and everything. And it just makes a lot more sense. Cause I think too, like that's not any wasted effort, like if you're augmenting digitally the work that your staff and faculty are doing, that will continue to give you a return on that investment in perpetuity versus like, okay, what's the value of putting plexiglass all over the place and all that? Like, you won't need to keep that after this is over. Like this too shall pass eventually when, I don't know, but like, there's not going to be a need for plexiglass all over the place all the time, but like create online courses, and train your faculty to, teach effectively online. That's going to serve you well, months and years into the future. So, I don't know, it really cemented that because there's so much risk and complexity to bringing people back on campus for faculty and students, and those kind of sort of sibling stories that you have. So I guess, yeah, like, like what do you hope that people maybe take away or think about it? I mean, again, like you didn't have like, sort of a firm goal in mind originally, but like now that they're out there and you're seeing that people are responding to them, like what do you hope people kind of take away or, what do you hope comes from this effort?
Yeah, well, I think the reality is that the choices that the administrators are making are with the implication that the experience that students will have on campus in the fall is at all comparable to a previous fall experience. And I think that that was a goal with the story, is to show that this experience will not be like anything that anybody's really anticipating. And so we're not like the options that are laid out for us are not totally normal fall, which will be great, versus online, which will be terrible. And I think that that's kind of the either or that is being presented right now. And that was part of what this story was supposed to get at, is that this will not be normal. Like this fall will not be anything like what has happened in the past. And so holding that up as the thing that we're comparing it to seems and feels really inaccurate, and like we're making a really false comparison. And so I really hope that immediately administrators are reconsidering these plans for fall. I think that some folks are equating youth with health, and that's just not true. That there are lots of young folks who are at high risk for really bad COVID-19 outcomes, and that it's really problematic to focus on maybe some student experiences to dictate these policies that will then be really harmful for other students. And I also point out in the faculty story that individuals might have family members that are at high risk, and that even if a student is totally healthy, maybe their family member or their faculty member is not healthy. And so having them go into the classroom is definitely risking somebody's health and potentially life. But I also really think that long term, I hope that long term administrators are thinking about diversifying those who are at these high levels, making these choices. That we really need perspectives from marginalized folks in those rooms making those choices. We need to make sure that people of color and LGBTQ folks and disabled folks and all intersections and combinations of those identities are in those rooms making those choices. And I think that one way immediately for administrators to do that is to just be listening to disabled and LGBTQ and folks of color on Twitter, on the internet, right? Like there have been tons of these hashtags cropping up to sort of demonstrate what these lived experiences are like LGBTQ in STEM, like Black in the Ivory, like academic ableism. All of those hashtags, I think, are required reading for administrators, and that they should be checking in with those periodically. And part of why I really hope that that is a takeaway for some administrators is that there were people who tweeted in response to this story, wow, thanks, I hadn't thought about that perspective before. And the fact that there are so many folks who have that response, who genuinely haven't thought about these perspectives, means that we need different people in those positions, or at the very least, we need those people to be actively seeking out those perspectives, to be actively looking and listening. And then it's not enough to just listen, but you need to actually incorporate the suggestions and the perspectives into your decision making as administrators, and like really incorporate what those lived experiences are like when you're making these high level policy choices that are going to impact everyone's experience in the classroom.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like some of the things that were coming to mind, because the faculty store could easily also, like, you could take a lens of like a staff member and like, and it really is like the whole university community. I mean, I'd say especially students, like these are the people who are, paying to study, in their program and achieve their academic goals and, all of these things. And I think, it keeps coming up in my mind of, just this sort of adage that I feel like it's like echoing in my head constantly of like making decisions with your students, not for your students.
Yeah.
And just like kind of remind yourself of that. And yeah, like who are you bringing into the room to provide commentary? And the fact that like, yeah, it's like if you just looked on Twitter, you'd see a lot of like, you don't even have to like, well, yeah, we're going to build a whole task force and council and have like, meetings on, whatever. It's like, no, people are, kind of shouting into the digital, void there. But like, because that's the idea, and I think it probably feels like that if like, a digital void, because it's like, is anybody listening? I don't know. I mean, yeah, we keep seeing these statements come out that seem to not be listening. So, because I think to me too, like certainly, yeah, like there's the financial imperative that, these institutions do have to operate within, and I acknowledge and respect that, but certainly like there's so many, again, like the financial resources that are going into putting in plexiglass and all these different things, or like testing, or I know like I've seen like, yeah, we're going to like build an infirmary in one of our buildings because like, yeah, probably people are going to get sick and we'll have to like care for them. And so I'm like, what? Like, you're not like, that's just seems so bananas to me. And like the idea that like also like what you kind of the setting that you put in, I know, especially for the student one, is the sort of hybrid model that is I think very common. And to me, it's like, because like you said, there's like the dichotomy of like on campus is like the good and only way, online is unacceptable and bad and whatever. And so like, and some of them are like, well, I mean, maybe we'll do hybrid, but I think what we're seeing is like, it's not enough of either, like you're doing neither well versus like, okay, we're committing to all online courses, at least for the fall term. So let's like really do our due diligence to, make those as best as we can, since like spring was just this, hurried shift to remote teaching. So that's just like what I'm really going to be bummed about is like that, say the plan goes just as they said it's hybrid and all that it's just, both the in-person and online will be done poorly. And then I think what some other people are also predicting, especially for certain institutions, that like they've laid out this plan and then come, the start of the term, they're gonna be like, actually, you know what, we can't do that, and have to do another hurried sort of shift. So yeah, it's just so interesting. And I think like, I mean, as of the time of this recording, you have like created these resources. It was, reached out kind of immediately when I saw it to try to get this scheduled, and but we're sharing this episode out very soon after we record it. But like, and even prior to that, I think, I was seeing all that stuff on Twitter that, this is out there, like the realities of people's experiences and their sort of advocacy and those things. Like it's, I don't know, it's been out there, but like, yeah, decisions are still coming out that seem to be, ignoring it, which again, I'm not going to kind of say that like with great malice forethought, that there's like, whatever, it's just kind of blissful ignorance, or that, they're just not aware. And I am hopeful that things like this and the folks who are sharing their experiences and advocacy and everything, that I hope it does move the needle, because, it is, I think like, the ivory tower sort of analogy definitely applies here.
Well, and part of why I wanted to include that faculty perspective, and part of why I'm planning to include a grad student perspective and a contingent faculty staff perspective, is because I think that there has also been this kind of pitting groups against each other, that students are really upset that the spring went so poorly. And so they are angry with their professors, and they don't want to go online because that's their only experience with online education, which as you mentioned, was like hurried and rushed, and nobody had prepared for it. And now the faculty are probably going to end up doing that again, as you mentioned, but through no fault of their own. And so the way that I structured the faculty story is it's longer and you have less choice. And that's intentional, that like the faculty members are going to be teaching courses early in the morning and late at night. And so it's going to, like, their days are going to be exhausting. And the point is to have fewer students in the same location at the same time. But the impact is really going to be on the faculty, that they are just going to be exhausted, but they're not going to have the choice to decide if it's online or not online, if it's 12 people in a classroom or 30. And like just kind of structuring the other story in a way that is kind of less engaging almost, because you don't get to make as many choices, to make the point that faculty aren't getting to make these choices, and that I think that a lot of the stakeholder groups are sort of being pitted against each other and not looking at this as us being in it together, that like all of us need to be working together and protecting each other. And that the way that choices are being made right now is maybe making it look like the students are all being really selfish and the faculty are all being really selfish, when I think that's not the reality. I think the reality is we're all being put into an impossible situation right now. And so how can we work together to make this impossible situation a little bit less challenging?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I guess one more like reflection, just sort of like kudos to you of how you like designed it, is like that, like, besides just like safety, I get, because it's sort of, I guess, a byproduct of all the safety measures in both stories, like time each day is like going to be the enemy, because like everything will just take longer, and I just was sort of kind of enamored with that too, because it's just like, we're only going to have 24 hours in a day, but like, yeah, you forgot your mask, you got to go back, or you got to wait because they got to like, only let so many people in, those sort of like, that is also just an objective reality. And just like, again, you're sort of enacting these policies and kind of expecting everybody to navigate them and carry them out, that like, obviously so much risk in terms of, how spaces are navigated, but then even then just sort of like, so many hours in the day, and faculty not being able to choose when their classes are, or students having to sort of bounce around or wait to get around, or just have like, a lot more limitations at time. So, well, I guess to, if it's anything that helped with, informing, the resources that you're creating, or any other kind of relevant like resources, just, in whatever sort of way you want to take that. I mean, I'm always just kind of excited to hear sort of what's grabbing folks' attention. Obviously mention some articles and the Twitter threads and hashtags and stuff like that. But anything else that you're like reading, watching, and or listening to that you'd want to give a tip of the hat to, that we can include in the show notes?
I really want to emphasize like the resources that are available, the conversations that people are having. And then I also just want to note that like, have these conversations with the marginalized folks. If you're having conversations with marginalized folks about their experiences, like, you should pay them for those conversations. Like, you should not just be asking for those experiences for free. But what I'm currently reading right now, and maybe this came out a little bit in how kind of dystopian my faculty story was, but I really like to read sort of like science fiction dystopian kind of novels. I just started Octavia Butler's Kindred. I'm like barely in it at all, and I'm already hooked. Like, I am upset that I am taken away from it to do like work things right now, because I am so enthralled by it. And I would definitely recommend her work.
Yeah, well, that just made me think of, I have, because I'm a big video game player, I have Last of Us Part 2 just like sitting waiting for me, which I feel like will be my sort of little dystopic sci-fi adventure to, I don't know, I guess now it doesn't really feel much like a escape. But yeah, I don't know, something about it's still very engaging. So, but yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, if nothing else, like all these resources and the voices of people that are giving the time, and they are just putting it out there publicly, on social media, that's one step. Like, that can just build your foundation of understanding, and then like bringing in someone in a sort of formalized consultative capacity if you need to, or uplifting the folks who are on your campus already, like just those people who can speak to the experiences or be advocates for others and those sort of things, I think is so important, just as the resources like that can be so huge. And that can be like, just make sure that you're going about things in such a more thoughtful and considerate way. Because I think, and it just does feel like often that it's like, the path forward is clear. It's just a matter of like the willpower to commit to it and see it through and do that. And because I think it really, every time I kind of mentioned to some colleagues and stuff, we're just like, I really think that we, people need to be, going all digital for the fall. There's like, well, housing and dining, it's so much like revenue and all that stuff. And I'm like, I get that, but I mean, it's just kind of like short-term thinking to, and then like other people who are like, well, just pull from the endowments and those, like if you have like a budget shortfall and it's, I don't know, there's so much going on. It's just such a like, but I think like you said, and this segues to kind of the final thoughts and those sort of things, like the idea that like we're going through this all together and we need to work together and listen to each other and, find those areas to kind of like be diplomatic and compromise and, just like find where like, because I think and this is me, I guess, getting on my soapbox for 1 second, is like, I think American society, we're really grappling with that idea of like, it's kind of serving yourself and independence and sort of like, all that. Like, you really have to think outside of ourselves and think of other people. And, it's down to the basic thing of wearing masks and up to the sort of wide systematic policies and those sort of things. So I don't know. It makes me think of just like, I'm going to go escape into a dystopic video game because I don't know, maybe I'm not as optimistic about that as I might want to be. But, as you sort of grapple with these things and really try to push for positive change, like, what are you optimistic about if you are seeing, ways in which people are trying to be more inclusive of, those variety of voices or, I don't know. Yeah. Just however you want to take this of like, we always end the episodes on an optimistic note. So like what's keeping you optimistic or what are you optimistic about for the future?
I'm hopeful that the accommodations that have been made, like using Zoom for meetings or being able to work remotely, being able to have conferences via Zoom is great for those who can't afford to travel or who have kids and can't get childcare. And so I'm really, really hopeful that these accommodations will remain and that these changes that we figured out, it's not that hard to do classes online. Like really, it's not that hard. It takes a little bit of thoughtfulness, but I argue that you should be that thoughtful for your face-to-face classes as well. That this, that having to be this intentional should be the norm, not just because we are online. But I guess one thing that also makes me optimistic about more inclusion is I'm waiting on my copy of Alice Wong's new book, Disability Visibility. The subtitle is First Person Stories from the 21st Century. And I'm very excited to read about that. And also hopeful that maybe some folks who are outside of the disability sphere might be compelled to sort of read these and hear narrative experiences of what it's actually like. Because your point about kind of the rugged individualism of the US, I think is so true. And that these experiences of like things taking longer and these policies that are really challenging. And like, we didn't even talk about how faculty members who don't want to teach face-to-face have to provide their health documentation. And how upset faculty members are about that. That's the lived experience of disabled folks who want accommodations, right? That we need to share information all the time. And that maybe this will open up folks' eyes to how we shouldn't want to live in a country that's very individualistic. We should want to be a community that's working together all the time. And we should be open to hearing each other's stories and how... And I think how like that storytelling is such a great way to get people to hear each other's perspectives and to change people's minds. And I'm really hopeful that being able to share stories through Twine and through books and things like that, folks will not want to live in this individualistic society and want to make it more of a community.
Absolutely. I agree. I mean, I think we're seeing that, as we're all quarantining and just consuming more stories, that like those can be compelling and visceral and really impact people. And I know for me, like I said, going through the stories that you helped sort of, that you had create on Twine, like, and how, the tough choices that you have to make, the real consequences and those sort of things, like that kind of unique way of storytelling too, just like cemented, the feelings that I have. And, I hope that other people can check them out and respond in a similar way. Because that idea too of like that, you always have to kind of prove it repeatedly and, sort of you have the sort of situation of like, something that is quote unquote more like invisible, that like, it's different when it's like, oh, I'm physically, I have these like physical limitations, so I need these accommodations. And then other times where it's like, you have to kind of, repeatedly prove where, something else that you need accommodations on, and just that having to be such an exhausting experience. And
Yes.
so, I mean, there's so many. And again, I just give you so many kudos because, you really embed those details in a very visceral way in the story. So very much encourage everyone, go check them out. We'll link out to them into the show notes, and feel free to obviously to connect with all the other resources that we've mentioned, and connect with Cait. But yeah, just thank you so much for, the work that you've done, and for giving a little bit of time to hang out for the podcast here and share all that you did. So yeah, just thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This was awesome, and I really enjoy your take on this, and your a thoughtfulness about kind of how to be more generous. I think a lot of academics want to kind of hold their resources and creations, and I really like the generosity that your podcast kind of embodies.
Yeah, like I can be generous to help other people be more generous, or so, absolutely happy to do it. So, thanks again for your time. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.